Hello and welcome to In the Studio on Tranceportal. My name's Hugh Tolland, better known as one half of Kayosa Tolland. And today I'm going to show you 5 tips that could help you to improve your lead synth sounds. So before we start, today's video is not going to be how to build a specific lead synth sound. It's going to be more about techniques that you can use to refine sounds that you've created yourself or presets that you have. We do quite a lot of mastering, we do A&R work, and we do quite a lot of just general feedback, listening to people's tracks. One of the things that we quite often find is that lead synths seem to be a real problem area. There's a lot of received wisdom out there on how we should deal with these things. So hopefully today I can try and give you some alternatives to use and help you to get the best results. So the first thing I want to do is to let you listen to a lead synth that has been given some of the standard answers that I'm seeing around the internet, then a version which we've applied some alternatives. And you can be the judge. These aren't tools which I'm saying use on every occasion. There are things to consider that may be the better answer to what you're trying to achieve. You'll hear from that what we're going for in this case is pretty typical trance supersaw sound. Now, I hope you'll agree that when listening to the both versions, the second one does have a lot more depth, dimension. It's a bit more interesting. Let's jump into why that is. So one of the things we see quite often is the overuse or over-harsh use of low-cut or high-pass filters, same thing. Well, yes, it is a valid tool, and it probably is required to some extent on most lead synth sounds. But what I see quite often is people applying arbitrary values. They say, cut your leads to 200 Hz, cut your leads to 400 Hz. And taking such a numbers-driven approach can really yield less than ideal results. So let's have a listen to this without any low cutting applied. And it's very, very heavy. That's going to cause us some real issues when we listen with our bass. Now, if we were to apply the standard issue approach of put a low cut on, yes, it addresses the abundance of bass, but it really changes the tone of the sound. And it's actually cutting so deep into some of the fundamental frequencies of that synth that it's taking away some of the warm tones of it and leaving you with something less than desirable. The first thing that I would ask myself is, where is that low information coming from? And is there another way I can deal with it? And the first thing that I would recommend exploring is the use of velocity. And most synths have a velocity control. Turn that all the way up. Start playing your sound, and then start adjusting the velocity of the notes in question. You can start to treat it like you're mixing it into the sound to bring the right balance. Now, of course, you may need to use some more EQ afterwards, but you can afford to be a bit more selective with that. In this case, I've went for something a bit more like this. So my low cut is much lower, and I have addressed the mid using a separate control. The reason for that being is, if you think of your mix has been pretty three-dimensional. The kick drum and the bass line in the low end are predominantly in the middle of that image. If we're freeing up space using mid-side EQ, then it stands to reason that the kick's going to punch through in the centre, and we can afford to leave a little bit more weight elsewhere. And a wise trance producer once told me they like their lead synths like they like their gentleman bits, like a thick destroyer. They don't like something that's thin and wispy. Okay, so the next topic I'm going to tackle is brightness. I'm going to break this into two sections. The first is in the situation where you need more brightness. Now, quite often people are reaching for noise or other layers. Now, those can work in the right context, but firstly on noise, considering what noise is, white noise anyway, it's every frequency in the whole spectrum being occupied at equal power, and that's never going to be easy to handle in a mix. And quite often there are tracks where so much noise, you can't hear the hi-hats, you can't hear other elements, and things get a bit unwieldy. And on the layering front, the more layers you add, the more phase issues you're going to have, and again, the more difficult the track's going to be to mix. So thinking about some of the pioneering trance and how that bright sound was achieved, so much of it was done on classic synthesizers, things like the Roland JP8000. And on that synth, there were three things that really gave it its character for me. The first was its detune, the next was its chorus, and the last one, and it's sometimes overlooked, was its treble knob. Now, quite often, people are using things like mag EQ, which isn't without its dangers. You know, if you're using mag EQ and noise, mag EQ introduces harmonics, so you're adding harmonics to a non-musical part of your signal through the noise, and you can very quickly end up with a real soup at the top end of your mix if you're not careful. So I spent a bit of time analysing what the treble knob in JP8000 does by recording audio without it activated and with it cranked up, and then EQ matching it essentially. So the lesson to be taken from it is that it's a broad EQ, like that. If we listen to this without, and then flip it on, so you can see using the broad EQ across your top end like this, right down into the mids, it's actually giving you a bit more of a balanced approach as opposed to something just boosting that super high and ends up with a noisy mess. So I'm not suggesting copy this EQ exactly, but certainly take the lesson that big broad EQs, don't be scared of them. And certainly if you're looking for more brightness, I would suggest try doing something like this before reaching straight for noise or another layer. It might just make your life a little bit easier and give you a better result in the end. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is when there's too much brightness. You probably know the kind of thing I'm talking about. It's when you hear that constant fizz, just shh through a track. Now it's a tricky balancing act because in a lot of cases you do want that sharpness from your lead just punching through. So how do you do that? Shaping your filter envelopes can be one answer. So let me just play you a little snippet with no filter envelope shaping. And in this case I've used Pro Q3 to aid the isolation of that real top end. So pretty much every synthesizer you'll deal with has an ADSR section for both the volume, the amp envelope, and also filter envelope. They may look slightly different, but they broadly do the same thing. And that thing is controlling the rate at which the filter closes to the level that you've set it. So if I pull the filter cutoff down just now, it starts to sound very dull very quickly. However, as you can see here, I have the decay coming up, the sustain hardly holding at all, and just a tiny bit of release. And when I push this knob here, it will start to make things sound more plucky because the top end is coming through and it's closing quickly. Now there's a balance to be had here where you set a level, you let the brightness come through, it closes down to a certain level where it's controlling that upper end and still sounds bright and energetic. Let me just demonstrate. Versus. So there you go, just one other tool you can use to create a little bit more space in your mix without having to reach for other tools. Okay, so this is my favourite one, and it's veering just a little bit into the sound design part, but nothing too deep, and I hope it's something that everyone can get their head around. You can probably apply some of these techniques to other types of sounds too. So if you've got a preset bank full of sounds that could be that little bit more interesting, try some of these things. Specifically though, when it comes to supersaw type leads, a lot of the preset banks that I see out there, there's a real over-dependence on unison as a method of detune. And for anyone that doesn't know what unison is, it's basically copying the signal and detuning it against itself. And typically in trance, the supersaw sound is defined by 7 or more voices. I'm going to take a synth with one voice and I'm going to start doing other stuff to it. So very quickly, this is how it sounds raw. Got a little bit Alice DJ sounding, and we probably don't want that. So the first thing I'm going to do here is tune in a bit of pitch bend on the LFO. Now, you probably don't want to do too much of this, but I think you can probably see there quite quickly that you can find some interesting spots that can give you a bit of a different character to your sound. So in this case, I'm just going to dial it back a little bit, and I'm going to keep it pretty fast. And the second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have a second oscillator activated, and I'm going to change the fine tune. So it's going to be the exact same sound, but I'm going to detune it. And when I say detune, I mean the fine tune. The cent value. I tend to find that anywhere between 7 up to 15 either way gives you pretty cool results. So let's listen to this, and then I'll activate the second oscillator and listen to the difference it makes already. Okay, so that's starting to sound like something. But the third thing I want to show you in relation to detune is chorus. Now, chorus is similar to unison in that it's creating extra voices, but the difference is that chorus has movement. It's not a stable standard detune that's staying the same the whole time. So it can be a lot more lively and a lot more interesting than just unison alone. So to give you the full effect, I'm going to give you an example by going fully wet on the chorus, and I'm going to move around some of these knobs. The rate, the depth, feedback delay, they're all very important. Just about every chorus has those knobs. Those will massively change the sound and texture. Listen to this. So imagine you have a sound that's pretty decent to begin with. So the last thing I want to talk about is resonance. Now, resonance can sound great on a synth. Generally, when your lead synth is filtered down, resonance gives it a little bit of magic. But have you ever came across a preset or a sound when the track's about to peak, you open the lead synth filter right up, the filter frequency, and it loses all the power? Well, listen to this, right? it just sounds weak. Now if I pull this resonance down, and on, I hope you can hear the difference across the wonders of the internet. So what that resonance is doing is it's pushing down the frequencies that aren't at that resonant point. So when you sweeping your resonance up and it's in a nice sweet spot, a lot of the body of the sound is coming through, then you pull it straight up to the top. Suddenly all the guts of the track fall out again. It's worth automating your resonance and pulling that down. I mean, it's not true of every sound, but in a lot of cases, something worth considering. Thanks for joining me. I hope you can take some value from the techniques I've shown you today. I'd love to know what you think. Thanks to the guys at Tranceportal for having us. Remember, if you like this type of content, subscribe to the page, check out some of the previous stuff. See you soon, guys.